Hello, and welcome back to Go With The Flow. I'm your host, Shannon, and today we'll be discussing AI. It is an extremely hot topic right now, and although there can be some arguments made for the benefits of AI, we want to share things that your professors and, of course, the Writing Center can do for you. Today, I am joined by Dr. McNamara, Dr. Canzonetta, and one of our Writing Center mentors, Josh. I'm going to let my guests introduce themselves by letting us know, for our professors, what they teach and where their area of expertise falls. And for Josh, you can just let us know what your major is and how long you've been working at the Writing Center. So, Dr. McNamara, why don't you start us off?
Sure. I'm Dr. McNamara. I am a faculty member in the English department. I also direct the Writing Center, so I get to work with Shannon and Josh all the time. My areas of expertise are in literacy studies, developmental writing, and multilingual writing, particularly interested in how students' literacy development happens over time, and currently how technology is changing that.
I'm Dr. Canzonetta. I have a lot of different expertises that make generative AI specifically a little bit tedious for me, and they are internet studies, authorship, plagiarism, and intellectual property studies. I have the same background in Rhet Comp as Tom does, and also algorithmic rhetorics, which really undergirds a lot of my understanding of AI and sort of the issues that we're seeing rising with it. I'm also a technical communicator, so I make a lot of, I would say, take a lot of care to make sure that writing is safe and making sure that people are able to understand what they're communicating to whom for what rhetorical purpose. So it's really about, am I doing what I think I'm doing in my writing? Is it really getting across the way it needs to? And it's kind of like the boring area of writing, I like to lovingly call it, because we're writing a lot of manuals, a lot of documentation, and that puts me up against a lot of software documentation a lot of the time. So I'm seeing a lot of how, different people from different disciplines are working with AI and how they're communicating about it, and really just documenting it.
Okay, and Josh.
My name is Josh. I am a computer science major, and I've been at the Writing Center for 3 years now.
All right, so like I said, today we're going to be talking about AI and discussing some of the battles that are currently happening, specifically in academia. So first, we're going to start with the basics. So how is AI changing the classroom? So either one of you could start us off with this. Do you see AI as a tool, a threat, or something more complicated? I'm sure everybody has their own opinions on this, but I definitely want to hear your guys's. So Dr. Canzonetta, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. And the first thing I want to do is get us all on the same page about what we mean, what is AI? So there are a lot of different types, a lot of different versions, all with different purposes, all programmed differently. So today we're going to talk about generative AI because Dr. McNamara and I have the most expertise in being able to talk about that. So generative AI is an AI that essentially functions through predicting what words are going to appear next to each other based on an input model that's largely comprised of websites like Reddit, the internet, basically anything you can find there, that a particular company, an AI company, has access to whatever section of the internet they have. So for us, that's presenting some unique moments in the classroom because these programs are a little different in previous AIs that we've had, which are narrow AIs that really run a lot of functions in our daily lives. So we have an AI that sort of sorts our inbox. So, our prominent messages versus our unfocused ones. You're working with an AI if you're talking to Siri. So there's a lot of really useful AI. And I think it's just really misnamed, right? So that's part of the problem. It's a marketing term that's meant to sell a particular technology more so than it's describing the function of the technology. So generative AI and large language models, which, language experts are good at talking about, are presenting some issues with student agency. They're presenting some issues with, I would say from my sort of technical writing perspective, they get a lot of directions and they use the imperative verbs a lot that have this psychological component of making people think that this is a confident answer, this is a confident direction that I'm getting, when in reality, it's just a prediction of a most likely response. So this is a really layered thing and it's different in each of my classes. So for me, I think that handled by an expert, an AI could be used well if it's designed ethically. But a lot of the consumer programs and software that are available right now are not designed ethically. So in first year writing, so I teach college writing 1. In that class, I ban AI because my whole purpose is to get students to learn how to make decisions themselves but also to like develop their own voices, and you kind of like become who you are in college. And I think that class is like the very first instance where you kind of experience that. If I'm teaching college writing too, I have to ban it entirely because I work with, and all of my students work with human research subjects. And there's really no anything guaranteeing your privacy, your own privacy of your data, the data you're working with other human subjects. And, we take that very seriously. In technical writing, I'm interested in helping my students develop their own ethical models because I think there's a great promise about, the democratizing properties of AI, this type of AI, which is really that it makes, creating technology more accessible to people. But that also means that it's not going through a lot of the regulations that it needs to make sure that it's safe. So in my tech writing class for my undergrads, I want to build AIs that are more ethical, that are smaller in focus, that have really narrow data sets, because that's actually where AI is the most useful, when it's most targeted, if that makes sense. So we're going to take a critical studying approach in that class. And then in my aviation and technical writing class for my master's level students, I have to ban it entirely because safety is the most important thing in that particular class, because we're documenting automation, we're documenting hardware, all of the stuff that keeps people up in the air when they're in an airplane. So I think for me, it's a really layered approach. I take, critical sort of approaches and also pragmatic ones. But I mean, in terms of the changes that I'm seeing in my classroom, I worry most about not really the lack of learning, not really the lack of anything other than this technology is having a really strong numbing effect on students. It's making them feel like they're less a part of their learning process. And there are studies that, have really credible credence and are suggesting that this is actually, numbing students to the learning process overall.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm leaning more threat at this point. I also teach a lot of college writing classes, and at that level, I'm often thinking about all the research in Jordan's and in my field that is about the importance of writing to students' cognitive development. And the ways that I'm hearing some people talking about how AI can be useful for teaching concerns me that it's short-circuiting some of that development. So I've heard faculty say stuff like, well, students can use it to create an annotated bibliography, which, I mean, there's the immediate problem that some of the sources don't exist that it'll give you back, but students then aren't going through the process of discovering well, what is an authoritative source? How do I find that? What are the journals in my field? I'm really concerned about all of that stuff. And then I think with my major classes, where ideally my junior and senior English majors already have wonderful critical thinking skills and great writing skills, but at that point we're dealing with really complicated theoretical texts, or they are doing research, and I don't want them outsourcing their secondary source gathering to an AI, because then you might leave Lewis not knowing what are the scholarly journals in my field. Where do I find them? What makes a scholarly journal put out from one professional organization different from another? So I'm just worried about the kind of context that students lose for their own disciplinary development, but also their own cognitive development. And I'm really concerned about the cognitive piece at the intro level, because I'm seeing students come out of high school who are really, I think, struggling to engage in long-term writing projects because they've kind of just gotten used to getting an immediate answer and not putting in the work for themselves.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think at the fundamental level, whenever we're teaching any kind of fundamentals, I want the students to be able to do that for themselves without this tool. And I think that's something that's really important for your cognitive development and growth, is putting your brain under good stress, right? And so, I remember being in college and I'm thinking, if I were in college right now and I had a big workload one week and I had a paper due and I needed to just finish the last paragraph before I got to this class, I understand how tempting it would be to do that and go and turn to something like ChatGPT or a generative AI program just to sort of parachute me into the end of the project, which, a lot of studies in our field suggest that's how students are actually approaching their collaborations with AI. But in doing that, you deprive yourself of that productive stress, right? Which is I have to get this done. It has to happen. I didn't have that crutch. So it was, I think, really beneficial for my learning because it forced me to go through these things that really lead to a lot of neuroplasticity and a lot of, I would say, flexibility and adaptability to how you respond to different situations. And that's exactly the skill you need to have to get a job in this AI frenzied world. So I think for me, I've never done this before, but I'm actually removing all technology from my class because all of the things that we're seeing from years and years of data are suggesting that we have, unfortunately, as educators, overwhelmed students with too much technology, and it's taking focus out of the classroom. So in classes where fundamentals are really important, I have to make sure students have those skills. And the other thing I'll say is, I know sometimes the work that you're asked to do in college can feel tedious. I know it can feel like, oh, this is not my major. This is not the work I want to be doing. But that is the fundamental building block of expertise. That's the fundamental building block of craft, right? Is like the tedium. Like you've done it so much that it becomes muscle memory, right? So the things that we have you doing in, like the gen ed and, our college writing 1 and 2 class are really to build the very start of that lifelong process. And it doesn't happen overnight. And I worry about what happens when we are applying so many shortcuts to that process.
Josh, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, the only thing that I was going to add, but I think Dr. McNamara already kind of like elaborated on that, was like, it talked about like generating annotated bibs is like, besides the fact that it's like just hallucinating sources that don't exist, it kind of loses the factor where the student has to like analyze the source and think critically about it and like understand how it's useful for their writing.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point. So I think about generative AI as a socio-technical system of use. And when I'm doing that, what I'm thinking about really, especially as a teacher, is like, what are my students losing in these interactions? Because yeah, I think it's definitely useful to use ChatGPT to help you create a study guide. But what you lose is the handwriting, which is what helps your memory. What you lose then is organizing information in your brain, which is a really important skill to have. So for us, I think that's what we're most concerned about. And that's something that you really have to start developing when you get to college if you're going to have it as sharp as you need it by the time you graduate.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that it's happening so early on. Like kids so young are using AI and already relying on it by the time they get to junior high that they never have the chance to develop any of those skills. I had a student last semester in 8th grade who relied on the Snapchat AI for every little thing, and I felt really bad for them because it's hard to come back from that because it does become an addiction. So this kind of brings me to my next question for you guys. Dr. Canzonetta, you kind of already touched on your strict AI policy in your classroom, but if a student is suspected of using AI, how do you handle that issue? Like, how do you approach the student? What is there to say? How can you help them?
Yeah, I mean, all of the best practices for plagiarism still apply. Like, those haven't changed. So I talk to the student about their process. I talk to them about where they started struggling. And for me, that's usually the key is like, I used it because I wasn't confident about my writing here, or I was really struggling to understand this particular idea. So for me, it's more about what is the learning problem that's happening here? And like, it's always been about like, why did you resort to insert like plagiarism or to using this technology? And then that helps me sort of refine my teaching practices and like how I address whatever issue it is moving forward. But I do think it's really important that students have consequences for, these are, I don't even think of them as plagiarism policies anymore. These are just learning boundaries I have in my class. You gotta learn the thing, you gotta practice with it and be able to do it. So for me, I've always been a super chill, very lax teacher in terms of my, my vibe in the classroom and everything, but I've had to be a little bit more strict than I've ever been because I, as the expert in the situation, understand like what is being lost in the exchange.
Right, I think that's well said. Dr. McNamara, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of the way, because I think what Jordan has said, like a lot of what we know from our field about good assignment design still stands. So I know that we're both designing assignments where students are collecting local human subjects data, surveys, interviewing, observations, that it's approved by the Institutional Review Board to make sure it's ethical. And I think having that local dimension helps, but I also share with my students, like there are consequences. Like we have an Institutional Review Board approved study and you can't make data up. Falsifying data is a huge intellectual dishonesty issue, which can cause you to fail the class, can cause you to be expelled from the university. So just kind of those, I guess, boundaries that have always been there are still there. But if there's a case, which I had a few years ago, where I suspect a student is using it in very, using it at all, but in like egregiously unproductive ways, I find two things. And some of the research that has looked at people's cognition while they're using AI has shown this. There's not any learning happening. So if a student submits something that is totally AI generated, all you have to do is ask them a few questions about the thing, and they typically can't answer it, which tells you a lot. Like, theoretically, you just wrote this thing, you should have learned something from it, but they don't know the content because they didn't engage with the content. But I also find just sticking with the rubric, if it's something that we have kind of outlawed in our class and we can't necessarily prove it, I typically find that the AI generated writing isn't sophisticated enough or critical enough or thoughtful enough because it's not a human. So it's definitely not any of those things. That it's at best like a D according to my rubrics. So I guess I'm not as concerned about it in terms of, because I know there's a lot of faculty asking questions like, what do I do when I see it? And I'm just kind of like, stick to your rubric, because I'm sure you're asking more from your students than it can put out for you.
Right. I think it's really important to note that AI is so surface level, and like generative AI, is so surface level, and it can't give you what you can produce on your own as long as you like put in the effort and do the research and spend time with assignments as you should be doing. So I guess this kind of comes around to my next question rather. When a student uses AI, do you think that they really understand like what they're doing, how they're hurting themselves, how they're, disrespecting themselves as a student, as a writer? Yeah, so Dr. McNamara, why don't you take off with this one? I'm really curious about this.
I actually immediately think of some of the research that Jordan has done, where she's, along with a colleague of ours at the University of Illinois, surveyed students and faculty about their attitudes about what is acceptable and unacceptable use. And I can let her say more, but I think you kind of found that students are usually aware when they're kind of veering into the category of academic dishonesty. And that's why I think the conversations that Jordan was talking about having with students when they use it are so important, to try and figure out like what is actually going on here. And I think this is where, as Writing Center director, we've had a number of faculty say like, can you create a training document or some kind of video tutorial for students to teach them about acceptable and unacceptable uses of AI, or plagiarism and not plagiarism? And I'm kind of like, well, if they've already failed the class, they've already been punished enough. But also like data-driven research suggests that they already know anyways and are doing it for some other reason.
Yeah. And I'm thinking back to when this all came out, right? And we didn't really know about ChatGPT. We didn't really know about these programs. I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to set some boundaries around it in my class so that way students know this is what's acceptable, this is what's not, and this is why. And all of my policies have always sort of centered around honoring the student's intellectual property. I value what you are saying in my classroom, and I know that if you put this work into one of these programs, there's nothing that guarantees you'll ever be able to profit from it, that gives you the attribution that you deserve for it. So I think I've sort of shifted my policy over time because I saw students working with things like ChatGPT in what I thought were critical ways. They're like, oh, this is a made up source. Like they were actually doing that work of, double checking it, verifying it, and they were trying to use it as sort of like a writing partner in ways that they would just consult it for like struggling with this question here. But over time, so that was like in college writing 2 in 2023. But over time, the over-reliance has been so much that I've had to shift completely and be a responsive teacher to what I think is, like I've mentioned before, this numbing factor, because this technological creep is something that happens throughout technological history. Is like the technology just creeps into our lives in such a way that it's everywhere before we even realize it's happened. And so for me, I think it's really important to stay responsive and to be able to change your practices and to be able to figure out what students really need. And what I think they need from me is understanding how this technology works. So back to your original point, I have actually started the semester with a student Gen AI primer that basically teaches them, this is what it is. This is how it works. These are your entanglements. So it's not just this Google search, right? Like this is having an impact on the environment. This is having an impact on people who are actually calling and going through, revising, looking at the training data and are seeing really disturbing images. And you should, if you have not done research on that, you should look at what that leads to for those people. And there are a lot of ethical concerns too in terms of, who is this labor being outsourced to? And if you have read Empire of AI from Karen Howe, you know exactly that this is the global south that is going to pick up the big burden from this, along with 2, water scarcity. So once students actually see that, their opinions and their ideas and their understandings of the program and the functionality change. So I assigned that reading for the first time this semester, and at least half of the responses were like, I thought AI was thinking, right? Which is like the one thing I really want to make sure my students understand by the time they leave my class. It's predicting, it's not thinking. And I think there's been a huge shift in that idea, because like a few years ago, I would say my students would definitely be like, no, this thing isn't thinking. It's like they call it like a beefed up Google search or something like that. But even now, that's not the case anymore. And the search results are actually not as good as they used to be when the technology first came out.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to some of the effectiveness around the marketing. Like, we're seeing the way that the companies are describing these quote unquote tools kind of creeping into our common vernacular, because it isn't thinking. I'm also thinking additionally, like, we all, for those of us that watch the Super Bowl, we were all inundated with AI commercials that were all about how it's going to like revolutionize your work and like, give you so much time because you're going to get rid of the menial parts of your work. And some of the studies are coming back showing that it's actually creating more work for individuals. So it's just always kind of interesting how these ideas kind of from marketing creep into our understanding of what's actually happening when it's actually quite the opposite.
Yes, and to that point, when you are processing all of the mistakes an AI has made, and now you're in charge of, instead of one role at a company and you're now covering 3, it's leading to worker burnout, which leads to, guess what, more errors. So it's kind of like this vicious cycle where people are now expected to wear so many hats because they have this tool. And this is something that Tom and I know from our field, because I've studied educational technology very closely. And everything I know about it is that, especially from EdTech, all of the technology's uses are grossly overhyped, right? And I feel like a lot of that is happening with this technology too. So Turnitin, they created the problem. Like, plagiarism has only ever been a teaching problem that those of us who are actually writing instructors solve like very easily after conversations with the student. We don't really like treat it as such a big deal, but they created a lot of hype around the issue. I remember looking at like the first instantiation of their website, and it was like, guarding academic integrity, keeping the teacher at the head of the classroom. And like, it was like positioning students and teachers against each other, which is not a helpful dynamic to have in the classroom. And then over time, they're building this giant mega database of student papers that has to date over 1 billion student papers in it. And throughout this entire process, they're adding on more features to their technology. They're saying things like, oh, this is going to ease your grading burden. And so I've actually been studying AI since 2016 because I'm an algorithmic rhetorics person. And so I'm looking at, the sort of algorithms that are at play and Turnitin, and I realize in my PhD program, like, this isn't a plagiarism detection service. This is just text matching. And that's what the program does. So the algorithmic parameters in that program are to match text according to other text that is available on the internet. It gives you a percentage score of originality, and that score is supposed to determine plagiarism. However, even back then, we knew that they were producing false reports, right? And misinterpreting what that data meant. So some teachers that didn't have a background in writing were like, oh, my student plagiarized, fail, without really even doing any kind of work to unpack what was happening with the student. So they created this problem, and then they created the solution. And now that database is just full of all of this student IP. I'm sure they are training their AI detector models on it, which, by the way, do not work at all. And so that's what I'm seeing here. It's just like a money chase, right? So we're going to put forth all of these plagiarism detection services, and there are, schools who have asked, like, can you show us how these work, or like what your models are? We're interested in this. Vanderbilt did this, and they're like, nah, we're going to keep that kind of private, but it's got like this percentage error rate. And it's just like, that's not really good enough for me. And there was actually a lawsuit recently that a student won because they were accused of plagiarizing and using AI when they hadn't. So this is creating a lot of trust issues among students and teachers. And it's just, I think in my book, one of those, overhyped algorithmic programs that people don't really understand what the input and output is doing, because they're not looking at the design of the technology and what is actually going in and out of the system.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you said about like pitting students and teachers against each other, I think the first time that Turnitin was ever used in a classroom that I was in was when I was probably like 13, and it's been used every year for me since then. I had a professor use it a couple years ago, and came into the classroom, said 98% of you plagiarized. And so we had to do impromptu presentations on the papers we had written right then and there, and just like to prove that we knew what we were talking about. So it can be it can be so difficult. I understand wanting to try to make sure that your students are doing the work and avoiding plagiarizing or avoiding using AI, but it does make it like not great for the other students who really did put in the effort and like spent time on the assignment. So moving on from that, we're gonna move on to talk about how AI can affect critical thinking skills, because for me, I think that is the major downfall here, and like it's really starting to hurt people. So first, I want to start with how students who use AI are primarily using it because they want to avoid struggling with their writing. But how does like actually struggling with your writing help you develop your critical thinking skills? And I know, Dr. Canzonetta, you kind of touched on this already, but I want more information.
I'll start specific and then you can end broad if that's cool. So I'm thinking about confirmation bias. And so the whole of algorithmic rhetorics, everything I've learned from the Association of Internet Researchers is telling me, hey, guess what? These algorithms actually are not neutral. They're not objective, which is the whole argument for having them in the first place. They're free of human bias. When in reality, because humans are designing these programs, they are infused and suffused with our bias. And then you add that on top of the internet, which is like the biggest concentration of bias I could possibly think of. And so what's happening then is students are just seeing and prompting, in some cases, a Gen AI program to actually align with their thinking so they don't have to sit with the tension. And I think there's, probably this element of unwillingness to sit with discomfort, right? And we've made things so easy, I think, through technology that Gen Z is actually, I just read 2 days ago, is actually worse at technology than millennials are. And so, the friction that you have when you're learning is actually the learning, right? It's forging new connections in your brain. It's that simple, and that's what it comes down to. So when you work with these programs, it's also, a lot of these companies will share data across platforms. So what's happening is like it's already got what you like, right? Like stored in the system, or, if you have an account, it's taking into consideration what you have learned before, what you've looked at, what you've liked, and that is going to play a factor and a role in shaping the information that you get from the program. So for me, it's creating these problems with echo chamber thinking. It's limiting your perspective, but it's really dangerous for confirmation bias.
Yeah, and I think, Shannon, when you asked that question, I immediately thought of the MIT study where they found that they had 3 groups of student writers, one that used AI to complete a writing task, one that could use internet resources like Google, and one that just did pencil and paper. What they found was that there was like lower brain activity for the ChatGPT group or the AI group. I think they used ChatGPT. I can't remember which AI they actually used. And that never came back. So even when they took that group of students and they said, okay, now just use pencil and paper, their brain activity was still less. So in addition to like, in terms of critical thinking, like us potentially not working with biased material, not being able to determine what's biased or giving something the credence of not being biased, I'm really just concerned about like the ability to critically think, which is a hard skill, and how it's not really giving students the space to develop that. And I think that's really different from how people who have years of professional academic expertise are using it. In that there was an interview about that study where one of the people who was interviewed said, I might use it when I'm stuck on a single sentence and ask it to give me 60 sentences, and I still might not use one of those sentences, but I now have 60 options that might spark a new idea. But that person already has the expertise to kind of determine what's working, what's not. So I'm kind of concerned about people getting to that level of higher order thinking or being unable to if they're using that tool kind of excessively.
Yeah, and there's also an element of agency here, right? And this has always been my biggest thing with students, which is like agency is really important for you to develop for yourself in college, right? And so it's this idea that you're in charge of your destiny. You get to make these little decisions about your day. You make these little micro decisions as you're completing an assignment on Blackboard. And so for me, if you're outsourcing all of that to a program like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, You're not undergoing the actual decision-making process. And that is actually something that is tied to, a lot of the critique about AI is that it obfuscates how you got to the information and it makes decisions without the human in the loop, right? And so we have to have humans at really important points in the feedback loop between, you and the machine to make sure that the proper oversight is there for safety measures. And so, we have AIs implicated in all of our devices. Sometimes it's in our medical devices. Sometimes it's like in our Alexa that's on our TV and our microphone. And all of this data is going into a lot of interesting places and is, I would say, like shaping a lot of marketing and a lot of the sort of ads that we get on a daily basis. And it makes me feel like, even when I'm doing something small, like, do I really want to buy this item? Or is it just because I've been, kind of working on like Amazon, or I've been working on a particular program and it's just like telling me I need all these things.
Josh, do you have anything to add from a student's perspective? Like, what are the benefits of like you sitting with a draft and like struggling with it? Because I think I have like something to say on that, but do you?
I can honestly say I haven't used AI to like help with a paper. Like the only times I've really used AI is like when a teacher's literally told me like, yeah, I just want you to mess around with AI for this assignment. And even then I was kind of hesitant, but like it's kind of part of the instructions. So I did it, but I can never say I can never say I've used AI to like write a paper, edit a paper, do any kind of writing in any form.
And I'll just like say really quickly, I'm very concerned about colleges and universities rushing to adopt this technology or try to get students to use it, because we're kind of already hearing, there was also a study that came out recently that companies, I think it was tech companies in Singapore, are pivoting to hiring more humanities majors because of the communication, the critical thinking skills. And I'm really just worried about the job prospects and like the ability to move up in your career if you are not getting the skills that are seeming to become valuable in workplaces right now.
And the current rhetoric is that, it's going to wipe out entry-level jobs for, the foreseeable future. And to me, as somebody who does a lot of career advocating for students and sees them through that, end of graduation process, that's really important work. Like that's where you get like the internship work, where you understand the fundamentals, but like, away from your teachers, away from the support you've had for years. This is where you really start developing your career. This is where the agency factor comes back in again. So that's really important work. And it also brings up the question of, well, what about when all of the senior level workers start retiring? There's nobody at the entry level. What's going to happen to everybody in the middle? And that's really important in a lot of fields. So that's important in law. That's important in writing, technical writing. It's important in graphic design. That's really the foundation of your intuition as a career person.
Right. And as a student, I think that there's something uniquely satisfying about doing the research and turning in a paper, and whether or not you get the grade that you truly want, you can at least know that you put in the work and you gave it your all. And I love that feeling. It's like a special sort of high, I guess, but I love that feeling. I love to write, and that's just me. I know a lot of students are not in the same boat as me, but I just think it's so beneficial to struggle with something.
Shannon, I hate to write. I'm a writing professor and I hate it. And I still feel that way at the end of it. I'm like, that was good for me.
It just it feels
same.
so good to like really bite with something and then get it all put together.
And that's the work of college, right? It builds your confidence over time. And I think that is definitely taking a back seat.
Right. And going off of that, I want to talk a little bit about the loss of students' voices when they get into using AI a little bit too much, because obviously a student voice is so important when it comes down to their writing. So I guess my question would be, overall, since AI has become so available to students, have you guys noticed like a stark change in students' voice or like their writing styles since AI came out?
Well, people are actually starting to talk like ChatGPT now, and they have started to actually internalize that particular type of writing in their own speech. So, yes.
Yeah, and I think I have noticed it even in stuff that isn't totally AI generated. So if a student writes something but then they run it through Grammarly, it just comes out kind of lifeless. And also what we know in our field about writing development is that a lot of technical and surface errors tend to kind of like crop up when students are doing difficult things. So Shannon, if you're in Intro to English Studies and you're reading, I don't know, some deconstruction, which is really hard. It's really hard to read. What tends to happen in those situations is your writing gets kind of fragmented because like your writing is reflecting your thinking and you're kind of like stretching yourself cognitively. And I think what AI or what Grammarly does is it kind of puts like a nice veneer over that, which for me as an instructor, like I'd rather see the struggle because then I get to know like, you know, where is Shannon at with this, or are they really understanding it at this point? And so I think that's where I'm seeing it more in the classroom. And I know, I guess, I don't know. I know I'm not the interviewer, but I'm curious, like with like the Grammarly piece, if that's something you guys have seen in the writing center, because I feel like for me as an instructor now, when I see like grammar errors, I'm like, yes, this person's doing the work. And so I don't know if that's been something you guys have been thinking about too, or witnessing.
That is something we talk about pretty often at the writing center, where it's like, one, that's just kind of like the whole point of like conducting an appointment as a mentor is like giving the writer agency and making sure that they're retaining ownership of the piece. But then that also transfers into like using AI and certain technologies that can kind of ruin that. And so, yeah, that's definitely something we talk about. And I have a bit of a personal story where I haven't used Grammarly, but I had a teacher that used Grammarly to grade a paper. And so
like, did they read your paper?
I couldn't tell you. I don't even know what he had the feedback report in there. And it was like docking me points for like grammar and stuff. And I'm like, I think my grammar is fine. But then it was like technicality stuff. And I'm like, I'm not even sure what that means.
Yeah.
But there was
nobody
like
knows what it means.
There was
because
no
it's nonsense.
feedback. Like the things that I was looking for is like, if you want to dock me on like a comma splice, that's fine. Like I totally get that. But like there was no feedback on like the content of my paper.
Mm. Yeah, and I feel like that's what you guys are paying for. Like, so that I get really demoralized and frankly really upset when I hear about faculty using AI to grade, because then at what point does it just become like AI talking to AI and nobody's actually doing anything and you graduate not knowing anything?
And we know that, you know, from the issues with ATS readers, which are applicant tracking systems, nobody's getting hired right now because it's just people writing with AI and then people writing the actual job ads with AI. And then an AI is scanning the resume and there's no meeting that's happening between these systems. And I think, you know, to your original point, something that we were worried about originally in algorithmic rhetorics was understanding that the more people continue to generate this type of writing, the more synthetic writing it's putting back into the feedback loop. So essentially, all of the writing on the internet, all the writing that's going into these programs dilutes the human content, and then we have more errors, right? And so there's this idea floating around that it's quite possible that there could be a model collapse for generative AI programs or large language models, because at some point they will run out of human content. And at that point, you're just training on AI content. And what does that mean? And there's a strong possibility that a program could degrade if that's the case. And everything I've been studying about the internet has shown that these numbers of generated content from, you know, humans versus bots is shifting dramatically, like basically every month right now. So some people are actually reporting and estimating that by the end of 2026, 90% of the internet is going to be bot traffic and bot written. So that's going to change the internet, and the internet is a really important thing for how all of our modern technology functions. And so I'm really worried about the fast changes to the internet that we're not really able to keep up with, that there's not a lot of attention on.
That is very scary to hear. And
sorry.
I also just want to say that when it comes to Grammarly, the grammar is not great. So please, please just avoid using it. It's very disheartening to see people using it. I would rather my students not know how to use a comma right and me show them how than for every comma to be wrong ever. I also think it is hard as a student in education to talk about AI because a lot of my peers, whom I love and respect, are really into it. And it's hard to have that discussion with them and to discuss why it's ethically wrong. Like, in my opinion, it's just like, it's very hard So, yeah.
There are a lot of ethical things that are, really important to consider. So one that we haven't talked about yet is, like authorship and citation. The reason why we cite in academia is not to torture you all, but it's to show you how we model knowledge making, right? So somebody starts an idea, they have some data that supports it, you look at it, you pick it apart, you critique it, you build on it, and sometimes you replicate the study, or you modernize it, or you update it in some way. And so it's really showing how the knowledge and the information has been taken up across different fields, across different disciplines, across different scholars within your own field. And what happens when we're using AI, so I'll give you an example of like an AI summary. When you're looking at an AI summary, you are not actually, when you are looking at the links associated with it, looking at all of the information that was pulled to give you that summary. That's based on everything that was within those search parameters that's available based on a company's access to the internet. So I've actually played around with these links. I've clicked on them a lot. They don't actually take me to what's being said in the summary, right? And so I don't have any idea where the information came from. I can't trace it. I can't interrogate its credibility. I do not want that. I need to know where my information is coming from, because if we're not working with accuracy, then what are we doing in knowledge making? It's a really important part of the conversation. And then, we have some studies that are coming through now in mathematics, in essay grading, that are saying grading with an AI is basically like a coin toss. It's like 50-50 on whether it's going to be legit or not. And so these to me are not strong knowledge-making processes, and they're not good collaborative efforts to do what we're trying to do in this very Lassallean and liberal arts education, which is teach you how to understand the world around you and how your engagements online are, shaping your bias, that are shaping how you understand the world, how you see it. And we are so embedded with the internet that we have to understand where our sources are coming from. If we don't, we're going to lose a lot. And the last thing I'll say on this ties back to critical thinking, which is, I was preparing to do this big study on okay, how many people are clicking these links? How are they doing critical inquiry? Based on the summary information. But I don't have to, because Google released the results for theirs, and only 8% of people click on the links from the summary. Only 8%, right? So what are we doing when we are just getting so far away from where our information came from? That's not helpful to me as a researcher. And that's why I really avoid it in research.
I will say maybe it is a little more personal and special to me as an education major, because I am one of very few English teachers. And so I think it's not that the other disciplines don't get it, but it might not just be something as relevant in their classroom right now, but I'm sure it will be very soon. So moving on now to our next segment, we're going to talk about research and information literacy. So first of all, how does AI, and I know we've talked about this already, so how does AI harm the research process? I think everybody researches differently, and it can be a different process for everyone. And so it has so many different ways to start the process and to find out what you're looking for. So I think if you just go and ask AI, you're not really going to get anywhere. So how does it harm that process, Dr. McNamara?
I mean, something I'm thinking about, in addition to I think all that Jordan kind of talked about earlier with this, to me, when I'm teaching college writing, what I'm trying to do is get students to shift how they think about research, how they think about argument, because often they come to us thinking, I start a paper with my argument, and then I find the things that back up that argument, and I just put those in the paper. Kind of putting, which I think for how research actually happens is putting the cart before the horse. And AI will give you an answer to something as though it is kind of like a settled fact, when often it isn't. Or it might be able to tell you some researchers think this, some researchers think that, but because it's not trained always on up-to-date research, and a lot of research is behind paywalls, it doesn't necessarily have a full grasp of what researchers are actually talking about something. So I guess one thing what's important for me in teaching research is just teaching students how to ask good questions. What is a good research question? How do you start a process of inquiry? How do you shift and pivot and develop that question based on secondary source research that you're finding? Because that's how we innovate, and that's how we come to new knowledge. I often use the kind of example in my class, if we did research as researchers, the way that research is taught in high school, which is like start with your thesis, defend it to your death, which is actually just debate. It's not argument, it's not research. We'd all still just be getting polio on a mass scale. But instead, and I guess maybe we're headed back to all getting polio, but but instead, like, we innovated, we came up with a vaccine, and we worked to solve that problem. So I guess I'm worried about the cost that it could have for us in terms of us actually innovating when we take the human mind out of that, and the human mind's ability to like identify problems in the world. And I think, Shannon, like, there's a similarity here to what you were saying about teaching. To me, as an educator, it's a professional abdication of my responsibility if I'm using AI to develop lesson plans, to grade things, because I'm supposed to be responsive to the students in front of me, which AI cannot know. And that is something that I would seriously, if I found out like teachers were doing at my kid's school, I'd be like, we are going to a different school. So I think that's really disheartening to hear, because I think, we're supposed to be developing the person in front of us. And in much the same way that it can't know what actual problems exist in the world and what problems need solving, which is the goal of research. It also can't know kids and the students that are in our classroom.
To that, I would add, curiosity is a really important part of this conversation, because when you are researching, it's often that you'll fall down this little rabbit hole and it ends up turning into your whole research project, right? So you're looking at a weird source, like you're sifting through this information. And what you're really doing is, discerning, like, is this information relevant to my search and my inquiry? And then again, you're developing your own systems and processes for weighing and judging how information is good for you or not. That's really important not to lose. Additionally, and another reason why I've sort of moved to a banning AI in my classrooms is that it is homogenizing not just language, but thought. So I have taught college writing too at this university since 2019. And every year I had these wild, cool ideas coming from students about what they wanted to research. So my class is about technology and your field and your career. Like, you got to just tie in any research project you want to do that you really like, completely developed from your own brain and thinking. And so what I used to get were like all these really rich topics about these really niche things in a particular career path, things that people were really excited about. And now I get the same 3 ideas from majors across campus. It's the same most popular ideas, because that's really what generative AI is doing. It's giving you the most generic answer, right? So, for me, when I hear people saying it can help you customize your X, Y, or Z, I'm like, no, it's the exact opposite. In fact, if you want to customize it, just write it yourself. And it ends up actually taking less time as well. But for me, I mean, the proprietary element of the research you're doing, I think, is important too, because I think anytime you engage with a Gen AI, even on research, you're an unwitting user tester. Usually user testers get paid in some way for the research they're doing. And what you're doing when you're working with these programs is you are actually refining their processes and, what goes into that. So I personally have a very well-defined and well-developed research rhythm that I have developed over years of expertise. And I frankly, don't want to give that to Microsoft unless they pay my consulting fee. So that's how I'm thinking about it, because, this is challenging everything we know about labor. And I think it's really important for us to protect our students and teach them how to protect themselves. And I'm not anti-AI. I think, it needs renamed to be what it actually is, which is there are a lot of different things we could call it, but I like thinking of it as customizable algorithmic automation, right? Because that kind of gets at the entire category of what we're doing. And I think small language models are actually well suited to do really cool things in research, because their data sets are so narrow and well defined, and we can actually discern what we're putting in. And I think that is really the way forward with AI, is really targeted, really intentional AIs. And, everybody keeps telling me that this technology has so many democratizing options and this is it, right? And so what I'm thinking is the actual democratizing aspect of this is that we can sort of move away from big tech and try and develop our own things. And that's what I'm really excited about in the conversation, especially for research.
Yeah, I think very well said. I really like what you said about when you do research, you sometimes go down these rabbit holes, and that's how you find the best information. I think for me, last semester, I took Shakespeare with Dr. Philippian, and he uses disability studies to look at the Shakespeare's plays, and I had never thought of that, and I actually loved it so much. And I fell down so many different rabbit holes to learn and find out new information. And you can hear me talk about it at Celebration of Scholarship this year.
Excellent.
Josh, do you have anything to add to that, like sitting with your research or like doing your own research, like how that affects you?
I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I mean, pretty much just the same stuff that, Dr. McNamara and Dr. Canzonetta have already said. I guess maybe a more specific example that I can give about like something I've worked on in the past is it's not necessarily, it wasn't a research topic or project per se. It was like a coding assignment for one of my CS classes. And I was really stumped on it for like the longest time. It was Windows, it was in C#. And so we had to figure out how to like incorporate UI into the program and stuff. And a lot of like different things had to be like separated. One, just kind of like on a security level, but kind of like two, like conceptually, it makes it easier to kind of organize the work and stuff like that. But like trying to get all that to work was like really difficult. And like it took me such a long time to figure out how to do it. And it was just like one of those things where like I had to step back and just like think about it for a while. And like I actually got to the point where I got a pen and piece of paper and literally like drew it out and like how it should work. And like once I did that, it just clicked and I'm like, I know how to do it now. And I went back in, I finished it up, and it's like one of the coolest things I've made. But I think that going into like the curiosity part, like the satisfaction of like doing your own work and feeling rewarded, like I think that is like a good example.
That's awesome, Josh. I think that's beautiful. Honestly, like really, again, just like getting the results that you want, it makes it all worth it, at least in my opinion. So, all right, we're gonna move on now to my next question. So when students use AI to do their research, do you find that the students actually are evaluating the evidence, or do they just actually accept the quote unquote polished version that AI is giving them?
What do you think?
Well, I guess I did have another question then that kind of pertains to that. Do you think that students are, rather than learning to research, are they just learning to edit? And are they even doing that well?
I mean, I would say I'm not even sure they're learning to edit. But, I mean, I think maybe mine and Jordan's perspective on this might be different because of just how we run our classrooms. Like the way we design assignments, we both ask students, and by ask, I guess I mean force, to do all their composing in Google Docs so we can see their revision history, and we ask them to reflect on that. So when I see a student use AI, it's like the 1-2 students a semester that have not done the work and are panicking at the end and come up with something that's totally out of left field, which isn't that different from the student in the past who would do research, quote unquote, on a topic all semester, and then at the 11th hour be like, I would like to research this other thing instead, which often meant they were just trying to recycle an old paper. So it's just like a new technology, like coming in with an old problem. So I don't know that I can speak to the kind of what's happening more widely across campus, just because of kind of the parameters I have set up in my classroom for how students find sources, how I ask them to read them. Like we do kind of like iterative reading, like, write a summary. Okay, your summary is missing a lot of things on the first pass. Go back and reread it, write it again. So there's so much process built in that I'm not seeing a ton of that stuff.
I'm circumventing it because my style in college writing 2, which is like the most research heavy class I teach, is I actually start the semester with giving students resources from places I know I trust and saying, this is the starting point. I'm here, I'm helping you. This is where you need to go next. Take a look at these references, start calling through that information and start highlighting what speaks to you most. And then we start getting into their research questions after they've read a few pieces that I know they can trust because I've vetted them. And then they're free to sort of move on to their own research processes. But at that point, they at least have a really solid understanding of what a good piece of credibility looks like and how to find information. And I think that anytime we ask AI to do that, I mean, students are noticing that it's just like producing fake resources. And still, like, I still see that happening here and there. But I don't think students are as, at least in, after I teach them what generative AI actually is, I feel like they start losing some interest in working with it because it's just going to take them longer if they have to like do a search to find a real source. Why wouldn't you just go to Google? You know what I mean? And the other thing I teach them is that when you learn information the wrong way, and this is coming back to some of my subject matter expertise in confirmation bias, when you learn something wrong, you actually have to take your brain through all of these wild deconditioning steps to remember the information accurately. And so I'm telling them, like, this is about your career. So if you use a program that's going to give you the wrong information, that might be what sticks in your brain. And that's not going to look good for you when you're on the job market, or even like in the job when you're trying to do it and complete it well. So that's kind of how I'm seeing things go down.
All right, we're going to move on to our next segment about how professors and the Writing Center can help you. So, first question will be for our professors. So, if a student is struggling with their editing, why is going to their professor or the Writing Center different than just asking AI?
I'll start us off.
Yeah.
All right. So the basis of all of this and everything that I think is really important to remember is learning is a social act. If I know one thing about learning, that's what I know. Whether it's language, whether it's an idea, whether it's a concept, it should happen socially with others. So going to talk to your professor is also building your professional network for when you're ready to graduate. And it's also, keeping your connection to Lewis, because we have a really robust alumni network. And so, go to your professor, go get to know them. We are desperate to get to know you all. Like, come to our office hours, hop on Zoom. Like, we want to work with you. Everybody who is working at this school wants to be a teacher first. This is a teaching first institution. So, like, come talk to us, come hang out. Like, we're bored, we want to see you. So that's my comment on going to see your professors. Going to the Writing Center comes back to that agency piece for me. So a Writing Center tutor is never going to take your computer and change your sentence for you. They're going to lead you through the learning process by asking you questions that you may not even know you needed to ask, right? So it's really about having guidance and a sort of coach through the process that also has lived experience and can make connections to the outside world. And that's the real benefit you have, and it's the benefit you're paying for being a student here. So I would definitely take up the Writing Center or take up your professor on an offer to chat about your paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think visiting the Writing Center, going through your paper with one of our wonderful writing mentors, like, you learn something and you learn how to evaluate. I mean, first you learn how to understand yourself as a writer and understand your own writing, but I think you also walk away from that having a better sense of what good writing looks like in your discipline, in your class, in your profession. And if you don't develop that skill, I mean, we know AI isn't always right, but you're not going to have that skill to bring to your workplace. When it gives you something, you're not going to be able to know, like, this looks good or this looks bad. And then you're kind of putting yourself professionally on the line because you don't have the ability to kind of vet what it's putting out if you are using it. So I think, we're really, and I often tell my students, like, the Writing Center, we're not going to do stuff for you. That agency piece that Jordan talked about, we're going to accompany you and, hope you learn from that situation. And I just think there's really such value to that. And it really, I think, professionalizes you in a way that a technology doing it for you and potentially doing it for you incorrectly cannot do.
Okay, so next, I'm going to direct this next question right at Josh. So, how does going to the Writing Center help a student develop their own voice instead of replacing it with whatever AI can produce?
Again, I think it kind of comes back to the agency, and they have to take ownership of their work, their writing. So they're responsible for using their own thoughts, their own words to write the paper. And that's really important. And I think where we can help is by just having discussions with the writers. Is like, if you come in and you want to just brainstorm or just talk about your paper, talking with a mentor can just give you a new perspective on what you're writing. And I think that's where we can help you, again, maintain your agency and keep your voice. And then you can kind of use that discussion to kind of maybe come up with new ideas that you didn't think about before, or just get, just help with your paper in general.
I'd add too, I think about how many sessions I too have been in Writing Center since 2005.
Wow.
It's been a long time, both, as an undergraduate mentor, as a graduate assistant, now as a director of one. And I'm sure you guys have both had this experience. A writer comes in and they're like, I need help editing. I need help on grammar, APA. And you start going over their paper with them and they get to a point and they're like, oh, that makes no sense. Or you ask a question like, is your data overall, are you arguing this is the main outcome of your data or your main finding? And they're like, no, whoa, I didn't think about that. I think there's so much refining of our thinking that happens through the kinds of conversations you all have with students. And AI just kind of often puts lipstick on a pig. Like Grammarly's going to take that and make it sound better, but the kind of thinking development and refining of like your arguments that you guys are all able to kind of work and walk students through doesn't really happen there. So I think, for me, I'm kind of a content over form person. I'm always primarily interested in the content, and I sometimes feel with the AI writing, I'm like, well, this sounds really good, but it's not really saying anything. And you guys, I think, really try to get students to do both.
And part of the reason that's so true at the Writing Center is that all of the mentors have amazing professional development. You are constantly engaged in topics in the field. You're constantly engaged in scholarship. You're working together when students aren't there asking for help, bouncing ideas off of each other. And you can't really replace that world knowledge and application with the current version we have of generative AI. It's just not there. That's not what its abilities are. So I think understanding that and understanding that a writing tutor is not then going to harvest your IP. It's not going to keep your data because it's a person. And I think that, I'm really trying to teach students to care about their data because, not a lot of people do.
Something I just want to say to add on to all of these wonderful answers is that I think part of the not visiting your professor or not visiting the writing center comes from fear of judgment or just not knowing where to go, feeling lost, And I think all students feel like this at some point, but I just want to say that your professors are always there to help you, and the writing center, it's all students just like you. We're all on the same level. No one there is going to nitpick your work or force you to change anything that you think is great. And it's all very conversational. Everyone is so friendly and nice. And maybe I'm a little biased, but I think it's well worth, a visit or two during your time in school. So I guess this kind of also goes to my next question, which is about encouragement. So how does encouragement play a role in academic development? Because obviously, if you ask AI to write something for you or give you feedback, it's not going to be like, "Oh, good job! This is amazing," because or they're not going to mean it. It's not going to mean it.
It's too much of that.
So
it's not going to mean it.
Programs are meant to be flattering, because the whole point is to keep you engaged, right? Engaged with the program so that you give the money to the people who are running the program, and it's meant to flatter you. And I think part of the learning process is dealing with discomfort and feeling uncomfortable to grow, right? That's the whole reason we use the phrase comfort zone. When you push yourself out of it, that's when you really start learning. And I think that's really challenging for Gen Z. And it's not just because of COVID, it's because y'all have had some really unfair exposure to screens throughout your entire education. But I would just say, I love the messiness. Bring the messiness, to me. That is my bread and butter. I'm there to help you through that. So I don't really care where your writing is, but you have to understand that when we're giving you feedback, it's not to critique you. It's not to break you down as a person. But I understand why you're scared, because writing is really vulnerable. It's a piece of your brain on the paper. So I understand the nervousness that comes with it. And maybe, you had a teacher in the past really hit you hard with a red pen, but that's just not the vibe of this writing program. This is not the vibe of the Writing Center. We really love working with the messy writing. That's kind of our bread and butter.
We're going to move on to our final segment, which is everybody's favorite segment, the word of the week. Josh is going to give us a word without the definition, and hopefully we will be able to guess its meaning. Take it away, Josh.
So the word of the week is bailiwick.
Spell it.
Bailiwick. Bailiwick.
W really threw me for a loop. Yes.
It sounds like something Gandalf is supposed to vanquish.
With
That's
8
my
wings.
guess. That's my guess.
Breath of fire. You can just shoot a guess.
I have no clue.
Can I get the origin, use it in a sentence, do all that?
It comes from Middle English. I don't know if I want to say too much more, because once you do kind of know the origins of the suffix and prefix, it is kind of obvious. So I don't want to give it away too much. But I guess just think about maybe the components of the word. In a sentence, let me see.
Candle wax?
No.
No, I was thinking wick, yeah.
Dang it.
It's something to do with bail, like getting
I'm-
bailed out of jail.
My brain is going to Beowulf, and then I'm trying to think of all
It's
of
not
the
spelled
stuff I
like
know
that.
that like, comes after it. Because like Middle English is not Beowulf. Beowulf is Old English.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like, what's the next evolution here? I'm trying to. I don't know. This doesn't look.
Where is Dr.
Wait, can you
Philippian?
use it in a sentence?
Yeah. So you never give the presentations. That's my bailiwick.
It's my job.
A grape? No.
Shannon's kind of close, but not exactly.
Dang it. Also, I will say, when Dr. Philippian was on, he also did not guess his word.
Okay,
so.
great.
Excellent.
That's my.
Man,
Wait. What did you say that you were closer with?
I said it's my job.
Can you say the sentence again?
You never give the presentations. That's my bailiwick.
Like, that's my job.
That's my jam. I don't know.
Step off. All right. You
Yeah.
know what, Josh? I give up. Tell me.
One last guess, or we good?
I stand by Gandalf.
Gandalf? Okay. So bailiwick means one sphere of operations or particular area of interest. So
Oh.
originally in Middle
Okay.
English, the bail part stood for bailiff, and the wick meant their jurisdiction, the area that they worked in. And so in modern use, it's used to refer to your area of expertise.
I was almost gonna say that after I heard your sentence, but I didn't.
We're gonna start saying that in faculty
Yeah.
meetings.
I am.
All right.
Just-
Okay. So I was talking with Shannon before we started recording. Do you want to know where I got this word?
Oh,
Yes.
yes, I do.
Okay. So I got this from Moira Rose.
Yes.
Oh, that's lovely.
Oh, my goodness.
Amazing. What a great idea.
All right.
I love
Thanks,
it.
Josh. Another wonderful word of the week. We missed you last week. My word was not great. All right. So, time to move on to our wrap up. Before we close today's episode, I want to remind our listeners that the Writing Center is here to support you through every stage of the writing process. You can make an appointment by visiting My Lewis and clicking the WC Online tab underneath Advising and Academic Support. You can also visit our online writing lab by visiting lewisu.edu/writing center. I also want to mention that we have some exciting and helpful events coming up this spring. On March 25th, we will be having 2 opportunities for students to join us for our Intro to Advanced Graduate Writing Workshop. The first opportunity will be from 12 to 1 in the Writing Center, and the second opportunity will be from 5 to 6 in the Writing Center, or you can join us virtually by clicking the link in the description. These are great opportunities to expand your knowledge or brush up on a writing style you haven't done in a while. Everyone's welcome, and we would love to see you there. I want to firstly thank our listeners for tuning in this week, and of course, a big thank you to my guests for joining me in today's conversation. I encourage you to keep writing, keep revising, and never be afraid to reach out for help along the way. This has been Go with the Flow. Until next time.